Funny thing, I have no idea what I want to title today's video. I've got a topic I want to talk about, I've got things I want to say, but what that turns into in terms of a video and title, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so there was a recent article on a blog to watch written by one of my favorite writers, Ariel Adams, where he spoke about what does it take to make a watch successful. And what he basically said was it's got to meet some minimum requirements for functionality, it's got to meet some minimum requirements for aesthetics, but it's got to have some sort of story to tell. If you can get those three things nailed, you're likely to have a successful watch. That was a great article. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Everyone should go read that article. I think it's one of the best I've read this year. But I want to take that a little bit further and talk about what I think are, in fact, the three components of a watch and how you get engaged with this hobby can fundamentally shift what a watch even is to you and how you understand it. And how that can also mean that your view of a watch could be fundamentally different to someone else's view of a watch. I'm not sure if that's really going to work, but we'll give it a try. Hi, I'm Pete McConville, and here I like to overthink, overanalyze, and just geek out way too much on watches. And today is going to be both very geeky, but also kind of potentially a complete disaster. I've tried to script this video a couple of times and it's never quite worked. So what I'm going to do instead is actually just talk to the camera about my ideas and hope to Christ this works. Okay, so the starting point of this discussion is an article by Ariel Adams, where, as I said in the intro, he spoke about like the three components of a successful watch launch. And what he basically said was a watch has to meet the minimum level of functionality that you expect a watch to have. It has to work enough, has to be wearable, some other odds and sods. At the same time, it's got to be, now he said beautiful. Now I'm going to extend that a little bit and say it's got to be aesthetically pleasing. So that doesn't mean pretty. It means it's got to have the kinds of looks, the kinds of specifications, the kinds of feel on the wrist that makes you want that watch, whatever that is for you. Maybe you want a watch with 1,000 meters water resistance. No one needs it, so it's not a function, but you will want it. And so that is an aesthetic, not a functional thing that might make you want the watch. But then finally, he said to trip you over the edge, to get you from the point of view of that's something I like to that's something I want to buy or that's something I'm really keen on. It's got to be more than just a nice function and aesthetically pleasing. There needs to be a story that gets you over the edge. There needs to be some narrative that makes you reach into your pocket and say, this is something I'm going to spend money on, whatever that narrative is. I'm going to go further than that and say not only is those sort of three good guidelines for how to think about a successful watch launch, I'm going to say those are actually the three components that all watches can be assessed against. The function of the watch, does the watch achieve the basic functions that it sets out to do? The aesthetics of a watch, and that is quite apart from meeting the minimum functions, does it have the kinds of things you want from that watch in terms of the way it looks, the way it feels, its specifications, that sort of thing? And then finally, there's the story of the watch. Is it in-house? Is it Swiss made? Was it worn by someone famous? Was it worn by someone like James Bond and someone that makes you keen to go? Did this watch or a watch like this go to the moon? Did it go to the bottom of the ocean? All of that is just story that makes you excited about the watch. It could actually be more than just that. It can be, is this a pricey watch? Is this a watch that comes with status? Does this watch have good resale value? Does this watch represent good value for money? All of that is story that makes you want to buy a watch that meets the other two criteria, that looks attractive and actually does the things it needs to do. And so if those are the three elements of a watch: function, aesthetics, and story. You can see as you move through that spectrum increasing divergence in how each of us experiences a watch, not just in terms of subjectively what appeals to us, but also what are we even exposed to in how we enjoy this hobby. Let me give you an example of how your exposure and experience and the way you kind of live your this hobby can affect the way you see and understand all of those elements of a watch. A couple of months ago, I got the opportunity to go to a Bremont event, and one of the English brothers, I always forget which one it is, I think it was Nick, was at the event. And I got an opportunity to talk to him one on one for a while. And at that event, they also presented what was then the prototype of, I'm going to call it their Viper. It was that prototype of the watch that they used as a prototype to test their new movement in the aircraft. It's a fairly polarizing design, very it looks like a piece of aircraft equipment, orange and black, and sort of these sort of aviation inspired hands, that sort of thing. Okay, so when that watch came out and was released, there was kind of a shitstorm of negative press. A lot of people really hated it. They didn't like it. They didn't like the look. They didn't like the story behind it. They didn't like the price. They didn't like, really, that watch was quite unpopular, and pretty much everyone the response went from kind of lukewarm to quite outright negative. Who are these people and why are they doing this to us? Um, and it was curious to me, as someone who was at the event and who had the opportunity to like hold it in my hand and to talk to one of the creators, to have a fundamentally different relationship with that watch to all the keyboard warriors on the other side of a screen, to see a completely different watch, to have a completely different understanding of what it was I was looking at, what I was hearing, what I was understanding. And it starts with, I'm going to start at the back end. I'm going to start with the story. For a lot of keyboard warriors on the other side of a screen whose only interaction with Bremont is virtual, I understand, and I felt that there was this sense of confection, this sense of artificiality behind the whole Bremont story. The story of how the brand got its name from the family, aircraft that loses power and has to land in the French field. They name it after the owner of the field, blah, blah, blah. The brand, that all felt a bit weird. This emphasis on aviation and military stuff all felt a bit, I don't know, a bit much. And I've said on videos, it just didn't ring true. Then at the event, when I'm sitting there, and to put this in perspective, I work in aviation. My current job means I work with historic warbird aeroplanes a lot. And so at the kind of very geeky, professional, hands-on engineering level. And at this event, when I got to sit down with, as I said, I think it was Nick Giles, and we are talking person to person, man to man, about these incredibly geeky behind the scenes. You only know this stuff if you're in the field, up to your elbows, getting really dirty about historic warbird aviation and what you try and do and how it's regulated and how you manage these problems and what it's like to try and get this aircraft up and running, that I realized this is real. This whole thing for them about aviation and where they want to go, these brothers live and breathe it. This is a real thing for them. Yeah, sure, they play it up, they turn it up a little bit for the channel, but this is a real event. This is this has real deep emotional connections to them. And from that moment, I looked at everything a little bit differently. From that moment, when they then brought out the prototype of the Viper, I looked at that watch in a fundamentally different way, and it had a very different feeling. Also, when I had it in my hand and was able to feel that even though it looks a bit weird through a screen, when you've got it in your hand as an actual physical object, it all started to hang together and all started to make a lot more sense. And it was actually quite attractive. And curiously, at that at that event, they took like 4 or 5 pre-orders for that watch. And that's where I got me, as again, fast forward, I'm now looking at what people who have only seen it through a screen. I'm listening to people talk about Bremont as a brand as only people who have kind of received it secondhand through, at worst, what they've heard is what other people have said about Bremont, or at best, at least all they've read is what's available online. They've never actually gone out and spoken to someone from the brand. They've never actually gone into a boutique and spoken to the people in the boutique. They've never felt the watches on their hand. And you end up with this wildly variant kind of experience in the hobby. And that got me thinking too about what would that be like for the vast majority of people who do only experience watches virtually, who do only experience watches sort of secondhand through what other people have said, and why their view on what a watch should be, often from a distance, is markedly different to how someone, and I'm going to go out there and potentially defends a group of people I've generally been very negative about, which is the media, how their view can be changed. Because if you're in the media and you get to go to all of these events, and I had this experience recently with an event I went to at Piaget, where a brand I've got no connection with at all. I've never felt anything positive or negative towards Piaget. They're just a thing that exists. I get to go to this event. I get to be there with, I'm going to say Gustav was the guy from the brand that was with me. And he's got the Altiplano prototype. And he's like super passionate about it. And he knows all this stuff that I would never be bothered reading about the brand. He knows all this stuff I would never be bothered reading about the watch. But for him, he lives and breathes it, and he's super excited, and he can't wait to tell you about it. And you get caught up and you start listening to things and reading things and seeing things that you would never otherwise see, that other people normally would never bother be interested in. And suddenly your eyes are opened to a brand and a watch, an idea, a story that you would never have otherwise seen. And weirdly, I think that's something that a lot of watch media get to do quite regularly. They get to see that, they get to understand things. And then when they talk about it, they're seen as shills. They're seen as people who have been bought. They've been seen as people who have been kind of paid to say things. And quite often that's absolutely true. But I think in a lot of cases, it's just that they've actually got a relationship with the brand. They've got a relationship with the people. They've got a relationship with the watches. They've got a relationship with the stories around those watches that you don't. And maybe you never will. And therefore, their view is kind of irrelevant to you. And you can just put a line through it and say, I don't care what you think of that watch. I'm never going to feel that. It's just not for me. But then on the other hand, maybe this is an opportunity for people to say, hey, maybe I've got to get out from behind. I've got to get out of my bedroom. I've got to get out from behind my computer screen. I've actually got to get to events. I've actually got to get to boutiques. I've got to get to a red bar. I've got to get to a place where I can talk to these brands. And a lot of these brands have events where you can have this engagement. And I've got to maybe see that there's a richer way of engaging in this hobby, that I've got to immerse myself a little bit more if I'm going to really understand where this passion is coming from. Or maybe not. Maybe you're going to say, you know what, I don't want to be involved in that. I don't want to be infected with that story. I don't want to be misled, and I don't want to be dragged along for the ride, and I don't want to be convinced to spend money I shouldn't on mere stories, mere narrative. You know what? That's okay too. It might be worthwhile for all of us to recognize that and then to see, how can I make my experience, do I want to make my experience in this hobby richer? Do I want to get out from behind my screen and have a deeper relationship with the hobby or not? It's really up to you. Anyway, I don't even know if this video is going to make it out of edit. I don't know if everything I just said even makes sense. Um, but it's a thought I've been having, and I'm having a go. So let's see what it goes. What do you think? Do you think I've been bought? Do you think I've allowed myself to be misled? Or do you think that there is something about the idea of different people that engage in what essentially looks like the same hobby, but in completely different ways, can end up with wildly varying views of essentially the same product? Let me know in the comments below. I've been Pete McConville. This is me rabbiting on about watches and the industry and thoughts and philosophy. If this is the sort of thing you like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff, and we'll see each other later. Bye.